We are going to be continuing with the quad formula, but now we're going to see some imaginary solutions. So far we had not done any quadratic formula where there was a negative under the square root because we had not learned that yet. We learned about imaginary numbers. Now we're going to put them in the quadratic formula. So as a reminder, this is your formula. X equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. And as always, if your b is negative, make sure you put that in parentheses, especially when you square it. If you do not, you will not get the right answer. So we are going to see some negative numbers show up under the square root. If you type that in your calculator, if your calculator is not in a plus bi mode, so as you see here, this calculator is, it says a plus bi, so your answers could have i's in them. If it says real, and you try to type one of these in the calculator, the whole thing from start to finish, it would give you an error because it doesn't take negatives. Now, if your calculator is in A plus BI mode, it's going to have some really long, ugly decimal with an I. That's still not an acceptable answer. I don't want a real long, ugly decimal. I want a simplified square root. So we are going to have some square roots that we simplify. So let's start here with number 1. I'm telling you to use the quadratic formula. If you got a question on the test and it did not specify which method, quadratic formula is going to be the guaranteed one to work. If you wanted to try factoring, like with the box method or something, you could try it, but it's not guaranteed to work because there won't always be two numbers to multiply what you need them to and then add what you need them to be. But quadratic formula is an always working method. So x equals negative, what's my b? Negative 3. Plus or minus the square root, my b squared, make sure you put that in parentheses, minus 4, my a is 3, my c is 6, and that's all over 2a, 2 times 3. So again, I do not want you just typing this all in the calculator as is. You're going to do a few steps at a time. Now, this next step, I can go ahead and make this a positive 3. A double negative right here is a positive. So 3 plus or minus the square root. And I've got to figure out what that number is. That's my discriminant. And I get negative 63 all over 6. Are there any questions on how I got to this step in particular? Okay. So first of all, this square root is negative, so I know for a fact I'm going to have to pull out the negative. Is the 63 a perfect square? No. So I'm going to go to the side and I'm going to break down the square root of negative 63. So I'm going to rewrite this. I know I'm going to have negative 1 times something. And that's going to leave me with 63. I need to know what the largest perfect square is that goes into 63. So it will end up being 9. If you're not sure, take 63 and divide it by all of the perfect squares under that. So for example, I would start with 49. No. 36. No. 25. We know not that one. 63 divided by 16. No. 63 divided by 9, there it is. So 9 and 7. Negative 1 times 9 times 7 is negative 63. So we have the square root of negative 1, the square root of 9, the square root of 7. Really, you can just go ahead and have it split up into the 3 square roots. You don't have to write that part. What is the square root of negative 1? I. What is the square root of 9? 3. And then the last one just stays as is. And when you write this, you're going to write the 3 first. 3, then I. Kind of like you say 5x. You don't say x5. 5x. So back to my fraction. 3 plus or minus 3i square root of 7 over 6. From this fraction down here, all that I did was replace the square root of negative 63 with what I found over here. And then the last thing you need to do is check to see if these 3 numbers can be divided by anything. You kind of ignore the one under the square root. Can you divide those 3 numbers by anything? 3. Yep. So this would be 1 plus or minus 1i square root of 7 over 2. So when you have a 1, if it's this one in front, that one has to stay there because it's 1 plus something. You can't drop the 1. But the 1 in front of the I, you can drop that one if you want because 1 times I doesn't change anything. Just be careful. Sometimes people are like, oh, I could just drop the 1. Only you can drop the 1 in front of the I, not the other one. Are there any questions? Let's do number 2. X equals negative, what's my b? 1 plus or minus the square root, that 1 squared minus 4. What's my a? 1. What's c? 4. All over 2, and my a is 1. So I get negative 15 under the square root. And that's all over 2, because 2 times 1 is 2. Any questions? Okay. Square root of negative 15. I know I'm going to take out the negative 1. And that's going to leave me with a positive 15. Are there any perfect squares that go evenly into 15? No. So I can't do anything else with the 15. What can I do with the square root of negative 1? It's I. So this is really just I square root of 15. And I cannot divide anything else out. Are there any questions? Right. Number 3. Negative, and my b is -3, so we have a double negative here. Plus or minus the square root of b squared, which is my -3 squared, minus 4. My a is 3, my c is 3, all over 2a. This -3 I can turn into a positive. Typed into my calculator, I get -27 under the square root and 6 on the bottom of the fraction. Alright, the square root of -27. I know I'm going to take out the -1. Anytime you have a negative, you have to do that. And then I'm left with 27. What is the largest perfect square that goes into 27? 9. 9 times what? 3. So I have the square root of -1, the square root of 9, the square root of 3. What is the square root of -1? Square root of 9? 3, and then the square root of 3 stays. So this becomes 3 plus or minus 3i square root of 3 over 6. You look at these 3 numbers. Is there anything you can divide those 3 numbers by? 3. Yeah. Thanks. Be careful with your I. Make sure it's clear that it's an I. If you're a sloppy writer and you just go like this, I might think you have a 1 there, and I might think that you wrote 11 square root of 3. So try to be cautious.
Does it matter if we write it
Like the curly cursive? Not necessarily, as long as it's clear you've got that good dot. A lot of times I do that because that does help signify that it's an I and not a 1. Alright, number 4 I'm going to do with you, and then there's 4 on the back that you're going to do by yourself. I'm going to go ahead and fill in. Get all these 2's. We have -2 plus or minus the square root of -2 squared minus 4 times 2 times 2 all over 2 times 2. You get 2 plus or minus the square root of -12 over 4. Take out the -1. I know that 4 is the largest perfect square that goes into 12. 4 times 3 is 12. This becomes an I, this becomes a 2, that stays square root of 3. And I get 2 plus or minus 2i square root of 3 over 4. I'll look at those three numbers, and I know they're all divisible by 2. So that means I can simplify. And I get the same answer as number 3. These have the same x-intercepts, basically. Now before you, the 4 on the back are a tad bit harder because they're not all just set equal to 0. So number 5, what's your A? 3. It's 3. What's your B? 0. Why do you know that B is 0? Right. B is always paired with just a plain X. You don't have a plain X, so your B is 0. And what's your C? 1. The other 3 you've got to get set equal to 0. So you're going to have to move some terms around. So it'd be -0, which would just be 0. So work on those 4. Okay, I've worked out number 5 if you want to take a look. You can drop the 0 if you want. But you do have to keep the plus or minus. Because it's really saying like positive 2i square root of 3 and negative 2i square root of 3. And then you can divide 0 by any number you want. So I divided all of those by 2. And I dropped the 0. So plus or minus 1i square root of 3 or I square root of 3 over 3 is the final answer. If you saw it on multiple choice, you would not see the 0, and you probably would not see the 1 there either. It would have just said I square root of 3, plus or minus. Okay, I have worked out number 6. You may have subtracted this 4x squared over, and then all of your signs would be different. If that was the case, you probably had a +1 and a -2 down here, which actually ends up being the same thing as a negative over a positive. Because a positive divided by a negative is a negative, negative divided by positive is a negative. So if you did that, your answer might look a little different, but it's actually the same. I will say that on multiple choice, you will never see a negative left in the denominator. You would see it with a negative on top, positive on bottom. Any questions on number 6? Okay. Here's number 7. 3 plus or minus 5i square root of 3 over 6. I can't divide. You have to be able to divide all 3 of these numbers by something. It doesn't work here. Any questions? All right, let me do the last one. All right, and last one, I got -5 plus or minus 3i square root of 15 all over 16.